We are 1722. Oh, yes, yeah. Anyway, we'll make a start. Good afternoon or evening, whatever you want to describe. Hello, and welcome to tonight's. I'm calling it tonight. Tonight's event, the second in the second season. We called it last time of our joint event between ourselves at the Chamber of Commerce and the MMU Future Economies team, the seminar series looking at a range of business issues. We kicked off last month, for those of you that were there, looking at the issue of people going back to the office, travel patterns, future working patterns. Had a really good and wide-ranging debate on that. And tonight we're looking at something equally as important, maybe not as on the face of it, maybe not as urgent as getting everyone back in the office, get the city centres going, but ultimately underlying it, absolutely crucial to where this country's going. And if you've been following what's been going on in the press this week around the release of the rail plan tomorrow, the whole issue around levelling up, etc., is absolutely current as we speak. So there's probably plenty to go at tonight. I'm joined, as ever, by Christian Spence, the head of Economic Data and Analytics at Future Economies Research Centre. I'll be handing over to him in a minute. I'm pleased to say we've got with Cordwell, OBE, the chair of the Greater Manchester Local Enterprise Partnership, and at the end, Andy Hollingsworth, head of Devolution Strategy at the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. We're all going to be taking a look at Budget 2021. Doesn't it seem a long time ago? Is it only 3 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Can't remember. Seems a long time ago. But we'll be refreshing your memories on that one. The comprehensive spending review as well, which took place at the same time. And some may say that's probably more important than maybe some of the stuff in the budget. So obviously that's setting out government spending plans over what needs doing. And of course looking at levelling up as well. I mentioned it already tonight. But those two things, the budget, comprehensive spending review, key parts of that triangle around levelling up. Because if you are going to level up, you're going to need some money from somewhere, and where is that money going to come from? What's it going to be spent on? So we're taking a look at the sort of national picture in that, and also looking at it from a more local GM perspective. And also, assessing things, what impact did Brexit, COVID had on the economy? Where do we go to next? And like I said, I'm sure that the integrated rail plan and what may or may not be announced tomorrow will probably come up at some place. So I'm going to ask our panelists just to say a few words, just to get the juices flowing, as it were, on this particular issue. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. We'll be having food and some more drinks afterwards from about 6:30 onwards. So please, if you want to stick around and continue the conversation, please feel free to do so. It's really good to see you all here tonight. We're expecting another few people to arrive, hopefully, so they'll join us as soon as they can. So what I'd like to do first of all is hand over to Christian to get the ball rolling on tonight's subject. Christian.
Thank you very much, guys. Good evening all. Very nice to see you all. I'm acutely conscious I'm sat first in the row, and therefore people to my left are ticking off bits of the things they want to talk about as I talk. So I'm going to rigorously I'm going to narrow my brief slightly and stay focused on the kind of macro stuff that came out of the budget and spending review, and just hint at the levelling up stuff, but I'm not taking too much away from other people. I think for me there's a couple of major interesting things about the budget. First one is we actually knew most of what was going to be announced in it beforehand. The ship of state is leaking more and more these days, and it seems to be a targeted approach from probably both Treasury and Number 10 in terms of getting the big news out early, and then bombarding us in the budget speech. I mean, the announcements came rapidly throughout the speech itself. This is certainly the largest, I think in terms of page count, it's one of the largest numbers of pages we got as documents. So one of the great things we all have to do is, as we're watching the Chancellor speak, is try and get ready to hit refresh on the Treasury's website before every other analyst in the country does. And the Treasury website goes down. But there were about 700 pages of policies announced, some of which we mentioned in the speech and some weren't. So we knew a lot. The headline story really is, from Sunak's point of view, from the Chancellor's point of view, is the economy is in better health than the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, expected 6 months previously. Mostly that's because the UK economy didn't suffer as badly over the summer in terms of COVID impact as both the OBR and, to be fair, most forecasters were expecting late in 2020 and early 2021. We got a decent bounce back in growth. He's kind of championed that over the summer. I would caveat that and say, yes, actually, the economy did grow well, but that's mostly because our dead cat bounced the most. So we had one of the largest falls in GDP of Western countries during COVID, primarily because of the way our statistics systems work. So we get a naturally bounce back of growth as things start to open up. But also because of tax rises. So the public sector finance picture looks much rosier than expected. Primarily because, first of all, we had the corporation tax rise announced back in the March budget. So that's increasing from 19 to 24% over the coming years. That's going to deliver low tens of millions into the Treasury as that moves through. And then before the budget itself was announced, we got news that we're going to have this NICS increase. So an additional 1.25 percentage points on both employer and employee NICs, theoretically ring-fenced to social care. The idea is it needs to be properly ring-fenced to social care over the long run, but it's going to do some general work in the health service before that. So that's another 20 odd. So with that, some fiscal drag, every Chancellor's best friend. So he's not increased any of the personal allowance bands. That'll suck a few more people both into basic rate and upper rate tax. That gives him a huge amount of a huge additional amount of spending, which no one was really expecting from the OBR forecasts of 6 months previously. In terms of the OBR forecast, I would say there's generally some pretty grim news. They're forecasting 6% growth for next year, which for me feels extraordinarily heavy, because I don't really see which parts of the UK economy that haven't opened up yet are suddenly about to next year. You know, we were talking about at the last month's seminar, how many people are coming back to work, at what scale are they? Oh, they're still about 35% down in office occupancy in the city of Manchester at the moment. I don't see how, certainly between now and spring, that number moves up substantially. My view would be if you haven't found a reason in a moderately sunny and dry autumn to come back to the city, I don't really see why you do when the rain starts to be horizontal and the weather generally becomes worse. So the 6% growth feels heavy, but he is looking pretty good in terms of the employment numbers. I think the latest data from the ONS yesterday suggests the furlough scheme has probably exited in a better state than we feared. There were just over 1 million left on furlough when the scheme came to an end at the end of September. Best estimates are at the moment that there's probably under 500,000, possibly as low as 300,000 of those people moved to redundancy. So that's all. I'm conscious that's a chunky number. The estimates are varying at the moment. But there was a lot of fear that most of those people left on the furlough scheme would move to redundancy. It looks like most of those have moved back into redundancy. The labour market is definitely looking more buoyant. 1.2 million vacancies is, if anything, now a problem for business rather than an opportunity. I'm going to cut on the business point. So there was sort of broadly good news, but I worry about these growth forecasts. So 6% next year I think is too high, because I don't really see where that comes from. But the medium-term outlook is sub 1.5% a year out to the end of what we call the forecast period, where we're looking to out into 2025. 1.5% growth is pretty noisy. And if we look at it at a per capita level, it's low still, about 1.2%. That is really going to be the single biggest constraint over public finances over a longer term. Essentially, the economy is not producing as much growth dynamically as it might have done, certainly pre-COVID and certainly pre-financial crisis back in 2008. And that's going to be really the big squeeze in terms of where some of this long-term funding comes from. Now, he announced a set of funding. Well, actually, what I should say on the forecasting stuff as well is the interesting thing from the OBR's digging into the OBR is it estimates COVID's probably had about a 2% long-run impact on the UK growth. So essentially, growth 5 years out will be 2%. lower than we would have expected to be had COVID not happened. That's what we call the long-term scarring. That number's come down substantially, earlier in the year we thought that was bigger, but we think it's only about 2% now. We think the long-term scarring on Brexit is 4. They've not adjusted their productivity numbers on that. So there is the expectation. I think a lot of people at the moment are now focused on the post-COVID thing. What's the scarring from that? It's very much whatever we think it is, broadly we think COVID's had only about half the scale of impact on the economy that Brexit will have. So there was a big long-term sort of headwind that the UK economy is still facing. In terms of the spending review, I mean, one bit of good news, we should look generally to the optimistic stuff. There has been, since the Osborne emergency budget back in 2010, the idea of protected and unprotected departments. So if you fall in the lucky bit of government, relatively speaking, of health, education, defence, and until recently international development, exactly, then your income was at least protected in real terms. Your spending ability was at least protected in real terms. Other departments took a much harder hit. Local government and justice probably being the two really big ones who've been suffered up to 2/3 real terms from cuts in that period. So Sunak is committed to increasing all departmental spend in real terms over the rest of this parliament. That still leaves most of those unprotected departments about 1/3 down on their spending in 2010. So there is still significant constraint. Now we should think about this very carefully because those departments are transport, their local government, their justice, they're all the kind of small bits of the state that most people assume just work. They're not the big headline ticket spending stuff of what's the investment in health, what's the investment in education. It's the stuff that makes sure that the court system functions, the streets get swept, social care happens. So there's still considerable constraint in that. I think that's important for the budget, which I promise I'm not going to dive into and cut across. We do see big terms increases in health spending. So certainly, yes, we have the short-term boost from the NIC increase, and we've got some short-term, large-scale increases in health. But over the budget horizons, we see those numbers falling at the end of the forecast. So one of the things that not enough people do when we look at spending numbers is look at not just the volume, but the profile. So the profile of spending rises quickly over the next 2 years, and then levels off to become almost flat in 2024 and 2025. Now, a lot of this increased spending is about how do we repair the damage that the pandemic has done to health, backlog in healthcare, the backlog in education, schools and universities. And it's good that we're seeing that money come here. I think the huge challenge is a lot of those backlogs and pressures aren't COVID related. COVID accelerated backlog pressures that were already there. And currently we're seeing funding packages commensurate to repair the COVID bit, at least in some departments and all. But there's still not really any attention to the fact that NHS waiting lists were already at record highs before the pandemic struck in March. So yes, broadly, the envelope of public spending is going up, but a lot of that is short term. And then if we start to look at other funding packages, so particularly those things being targeted around the leveling up agenda, so there's a huge amount of announcements around business rate reliefs for arts, culture, retail sort of sectors, additional funding into those kind of things. A, they're short term, and B, they're often capped. It's probably something we might get into later on, is the government loves pumping capital money into things. I would still say it's not enough, but it's all capital rather than revenue. So it assumes that something big, shiny, and physical can happen, and that it doesn't need anyone to administer the money which delivers the big, shiny capital. And secondly, that those pots are generally disparate, small, and competitive. And that those three things don't particularly help. Disparate because they're targeting several different things, so you can't bid for these three pots and then merge them and spend them differently. They're tightly allocated. And then particularly the fact that they're competitive. So the competitiveness at a national level, something that even within the EU funding scheme, the UK government managed to do, keep everything controlled nationally, ends up with essentially civil servants in Whitehall trying to decide whether a new park in Chester is of more or less economic value than a full bus route in Norfolk. And this stuff just doesn't work. So for me, we still don't see the genuine devolution of here is money, go ahead and spend it. It's always come to Whitehall, and as long as we can make a strong case. But the challenge is that competitiveness means even if you make an extremely good case, if it's less competitive than somebody else's, even though it may be more necessary in your area, then you end up being bid out. So less competitive possibilities. So then, in terms of low paid, we've seen, yes, the increases coming through in national minimum wage and national living wage, but most of that is sort of counteracted by the universal credit changes. Always terrifying when I know there is someone here who knows infinitely more about universal credit than I do. But this huge challenge, the idea that it's sort of £20 a week temporary uplift removed, theoretically offset by narrowing the take rate for those in work, but it misses the fact that actually quite a large share of universal credit claimants aren't in work anyway for very good reasons, and so they did benefit. So the overall numbers were that essentially, on average, all of those people we see are less well off on the basis of doing all of that.
And 2/3 of Greater Manchester of UC payments are not in work.
Exactly. So you see the problem of saying, well, we attach this to a work-related idea. If only we can get you all to work more, we'll allow you to keep the extra 7 pence in the bank. It misses the point that actually the whole point of the benefit in many ways is to support those who aren't in work. There's loads to go into which we won't pick, so I'm not going to dwell on that, other than just to sum up to say, there's a lot of sort of good stuff. It's not that the budget is in entirely the wrong direction. It sought to seek, I think, a moderately acceptable balance between banking some of the additional cash that trade have received because the economy has performed better, with increasing cash to public services. There's clearly 20 billion or so being kept back ready for the next election, 2024 probably. So there are some tax giveaways there. It's a shame we still have that short-term thinking, but politics is politics. But it's like none of it's quite coherent. There's, it talks, the speech talks to the levelling up, it talks to we need to do the retail, we need to look at high streets, we need to get investment. But none of it gels. There's just, it's the one thing that I think all of us we can talk about continually since we arrived here, is there's just no strategy to hang any of this on. It's sort of just whoever's got the loudest idea at the time gets further. Politics has often been like that, but I'd say one of the challenges is it's worse than it's been for a while. I'll stop there.
I've done that bombshell. That's Christian. It's been really interesting stuff, and we'll come back to some of the issues you raised in there as well. Totally agree from the point of view of the sheer volume of stuff. If you think back to the weekend previously and all the leaks that were in the Sunday papers and everything, we got to the point where you're thinking, well, what else is he going to say? Like an hour and a half later, the budget speech, you're thinking, oh, that's quite a bit there. The sheer volume of it, I remember looking at the Red Book on the Treasury website and thinking, this doesn't normally look like this. Unbelievable and very little narrative, a lot of condensed stuff there. So, unbelievable in scale, totally get the point. What is the purpose? What's the overarching strategy? A lot of noise, but very little actual sense of direction in moving forward. So we'll come back to that. Lou, I'd like to ask you now to give us your thoughts from a business perspective, obviously, on spending review, the budget, and also the levelling up it as well. And then some of the issues that are very great to Manchester as well. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to try and add maybe a handful of things that build on what Christian's just talked about, but I'm going to look at it entirely, I guess, through a business lens. I'm a business owner in Greater Manchester as well as China there. But also a little bit, I guess, through our Greater Manchester lens, and as people have seen, we went into the budget making an offer. Our definition of levelling up and a levelling up deal and what that might look like. So, and then I imagine I'm going to talk more about that and a bit more about the GM perspective. So I'll try and drop a handful of things in that hopefully we can take in the conversation. So I think for anybody who missed our kind of levelling up offer to government, then largely focused on what our mayor would describe as a London-style transport system. So a lot of discussion inevitably and rightly about transport. We have a very clear view on what green and net zero looks like. We've got an opportunity to remove 1 million tonnes of carbon, and that was rolled into our offer. Obviously, very heavily connected to transport, but not just transport. And then skills is another massively hot topic for us, and also skills, particularly in the context of an innovation agenda. So we would all agree with the opportunity for a science and innovation-led economic recovery. It's something we think is a particular strength here in Greater Manchester through our academic institutions, through our assets, through our Greater Manchester skills and actually a lot of the inward investment we've seen in recent has been in some of those kind of new, what was in our local industrial strategy that's now being pulled up into our wider economic strategy. So we went into it with a very clear offer. We went into multi-continents with that very clear offer. And interestingly, post-CSR, most of that we still don't have an answer on, really, in the sense that we've got a bit of an answer on the transport question, but really we've now got one eye on the levelling up white paper because we're hoping some of the answers to whether somebody wants to take us up on that offer sit there. So I think, so that's the kind of Greater Manchester perspective in terms of the budget. If I look at where business is at and some of the questions we might like to have answered in the spending review, and we're certainly going to want answered in the levelling up white paper, I think it's anybody who, as you do, deals with business on a daily basis, it's been an extraordinary time to try and manage a business, either in growth or in decline. In either of those circumstances, you're dealing with quite unprecedented territories. So you're largely dealing with business leaders who are tired, who are really trying to galvanise teams and create some real energy and momentum, either to capitalise on the opportunities. We've been a business that's we're in digital transformation, so you can imagine all of the people who now decide that the future of everything is digital. We've had a very busy year, and at the same time, if you're running restaurant chains, trying to work out do you have a business in 6 months. So either way, and in either of those circumstances, largely business leaders are trying to engender some confidence. So you're looking all the time in these things to some confidence signals that allow you to go, this is the direction of travel. And when they say this is the direction of travel, this is what they mean. So I think for us, green is a massive theme for Greater Manchester. So I think that was, as we saw in all the headlines, something that felt bizarrely pre-COP slightly lacking in the budget. We're hoping we're going to see more of that in the levelling up agenda. We see a massive economic opportunity, not just the right thing to do opportunity around green and our future economy, green tech, retrofit, all of those things that we know we can either transfer people who are industries that are not going to thrive in 10 years' time, or grow new skills and new talent into those industries. Skills is the single biggest pain point of Brexit of every single business in every single sector. So again, it was a bit of a mixed message, and I think one we could unpick a little bit in terms of some big headlines in the budget. But again, we're looking to see how that's going to be supported in the levelling up agenda. There is a huge opportunity, and the easiest way for us to do some of that levelling up is to reskill and create new skills investments. So it will be really interesting to see how that plays out. This week is Real Living Wage week, so again, we've made our commitments as Greater Manchester. Obviously, the Living Wage Foundation has done some brilliant work. We saw a change in minimum wage, but actually, interestingly, Real Living Wage has changed to £9.90 this week, which is a reflection of all the fuel prices and general inflation. So it's interesting that whilst we'll welcome an increase in minimum wage, it's still, by the time we get to £9.50, not going to be where we believe real living wage needs to be now. So and again, that presents its challenges for business, because that's got to come from somewhere. A distinct lack of any conversation around Brexit, which does seem bizarre but possibly predictable. And again, we know that the reality of where business confidence is sitting, the strains that are being placed on all kinds of people from a skills basis as well as a kind of physical connectivity and supply basis are not likely to disappear anytime soon. So I think being able to look that in the eye for what it is and deal with that through what comes. I don't think that's going to be directly addressed in the levelling up white paper, so it's going to be interesting how we get to that, but reskilling is definitely part of it. And actually, to that point before, what we're seeing in a lot of business is 10 years of change in 10 months, a transformation agenda, which is about skills, but it's also about leadership. So where is the leadership support actually for those businesses? And so I think what we see is an opportunity around levelling up to make it clear where we think the clusters or not are going to be and how we drive that. So I think that the reality of, if you speak to most business leaders at the moment, that's what they're doing: the skills challenge, transformation challenge, complete uncertainty, and actually what we are seeing in the region at the moment is some fairly significant investment on the belief that levelling up is going to happen. So there is I think we need to see in the paper real confidence that there is a commitment to levelling up, but also a definition. So I think part of the confidence is having a collective definition. And I mean, so the LEP review is likely to land within the paper. Again, that definition of what the role of organisations like LEPs is in the context of a clearly defined levelling up agenda is going to be really, really important. And then again, Kristen, you talked a little bit about the centralised versus devolved. Obviously, that's a particular hot topic in Manchester. But again, we're looking to the levelling up paper to see what the direction of travel is going to be around devolved power, because as you say, we've realised that perhaps some challenges in the way that we were kind of addressing some of the biggest business challenges in the pandemic was an over-centralisation of some of that decision making and some of that funding. So actually, we will be very clear that we'll welcome more devolved power, more devolved control, not of everything, but on some of those key topics like green and skills. But we need to move at pace, and we need to be reflective of what the opportunities are in our city region. So, yeah, really interested to hear everybody's thoughts on all of that. Thank you.
That's great, thanks, Liam. And again, loads of stuff that I can identify with. And you made a point, I think, nodding around on the panel, right? Business owners feeling tired and year. There's a lot of people feeling like that at the moment in time with that. But it's interesting because there's such, it's just one thing after another. We come in, and part of the problem we have at the chamber sometimes with this stuff, I mentioned this at the last event, is sometimes trying to disaggregate what the true cause of something is.
Yes.
And it's still merged, like you wouldn't believe, with during Brexit, COVID, any one of any other number of issues, and so it's difficult sometimes because you go, well, what's the real reason behind it? And you've got to say, well, it's any one of three or four things that's happening all at the same time. And it's very difficult because if you don't know what the cause is, you could never solve the problem. So if you think it's COVID and you go down that route, and then all of a sudden you find out it's actually Brexit, you've spent a lot of time and effort solving a problem that actually isn't there. So there's some real issues with this stuff. And sometimes say, it's loads of things happening at present. That's very dangerous. It's a really dangerous place to be at this time when people are looking at producing plans that are going to solve some of these problems. You don't know what's causing them. Are we going to get the right solution?
So true that I think there's a perfect storm around some of these things, but to try and pick what that is. I was talking to a company last week who is a huge national provider of logistics, and they were saying they've got record levels of absenteeism in their staff. And so instantly people go, oh, it's COVID. Actually, when they've unpicked it and there's just a massive mental wellbeing challenge where people are desperately worried about job security. They're desperately strained because they're delivering all the digital orders and e-commerce that they are missing 2% of the workforce because of Brexit. So it's this perfect storm, but actually, to make a kind of blind sweeping statement of, this is COVID related. It's the detail of picking that to try and then get to the root cause.
Speak to one last week, and we said we've permanently got 20 vacancies. We just can't fill. We get somebody in, and then somebody else goes, and you get into it. There's a number of things. Part of it is the impact of Brexit and Eastern European workers now no longer coming into the country. Part of it was COVID. Part of it is the actual, really tough competition within that sector. They lose people for an extra 50 pence an hour. People will walk out of the job because next door or a little bit further down the road is paying them an extra 50 pence an hour. And you're just thinking, wow. But it is that tight, and they are losing business to it. And he just said, I just can't fill it. It's a crazy situation.
You've also, Chris, got you've got the playing in of the two issues, because the impact of COVID still in Europe with the higher rates means you've almost got like a combination combination,
Yeah.
sort of COVID and Brexit.
Yeah,
at the same
yeah.
time, sort of
Very true.
going
Yeah,
on.
yeah. It's tricky. It's hard work. I'm just sounding like a bit doom and gloom with this. Really. We try to find something positive to get out of this. We should be positive. Don't know if that's in your remit, Andy, but go on, give it a go. Andy.
And it's interesting on the competition wages, don't know if you saw yesterday, it's not just a business thing. So NHS Confederation came out yesterday and said we need within weeks retention bonus in social care, or everybody will pick up and walk into retail over winter, and they're already right on the edge. So sort of washing out in various different places. But yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the kind of levelling of deal with government, what we know about what's come out so far from spending review budget, most of the gaps are, what we're still waiting to find out on, I suppose. So they're going to cover the broad deal, which was in essence, focused quite heavily on transport, and big set piece with the local staff transport system. There was a big commitment around decarbonisation, which is driven through a combination of transport investments and retrofit of public buildings, social homes, businesses. There was a kind of set of proposals around skills, human capital, talent, which was in effect about sort of greater freedom to use our devolved skills budgets and the ability to better match those to the particular needs of sort of different sectors in Greater Manchester. So at the moment, a lot of those budgets, we get some degree of freedom, but there's a degree to which they're sort of, you've got to put it in this area or this area. There's certain courses that are funded that are decided nationally, etc. And then the segment we've not talked about quite so much was sort of pride in place on this physical regeneration, both in terms of sort of employment sites, but also town centres, housing, that kind of thing. So there's a sort of set of proposals around there, underpinned crucially, and we'll get to this at the end, by an office to sort of take greater accountability. We're getting that stuff done. And this speaks a lot, we'll talk about it later, to Christian's point about biddable funding pots. Actually, a lot of this stuff is really difficult if you're in a competition, not just because you don't know whether you're going to be successful or not, but because you can't work through a pipeline, you can't build relationships with the supply chain, if you're doing kind of transport investment or whatever, because you're kind of constantly in decent time. You can't join up different investments because you don't know if it's one and it's both going to land or not. So that was sort of broadly the offer. In terms of what we know from the spending review and budget, as Christian said, the sort of picture of public service spending is better than expected. I would say there's a sting in the tail that the local government settlement is a bait and switch. So in the first year, there is genuinely new grant going into the sector that can be used to deal with existing pressures, but that stays flat over years 2 and 3. So it starts to get eaten away by demography and demand pressures. There's then a second tranche of money to pay for the new social care reforms, to pay for the cap on care costs and eligibility rules and things like that. The stuff that Boris announced in September, that's paying for the new responsibilities. That's not money available for existing services. But you lay the two together and you get a real terms rise every year. But in reality, it sort of goes bump flat in terms of money available for real services. So my sort of take on it is broadly we just about bail out the boat next year, but no one puts a stopper at the bottom. So it just put a rule for 5 years for spending period again, unless we do something quite different. Transport, everyone will have picked up. It was one of the big, heavily pre-leaked announcements the weekend before the spending review. Much panic in the CA. The press release came out at like 10 PM on Friday. Very little notice. But, you know, it was a wonderful announcement, so we'll take it. So it was quite significant. It was the £1 billion that was all over the NEN, which is a capital settlement over 5 years. Some of it is new money, some of it rolls together existing pots that do highways and potholes, pinch points and things like that. But it is a sort of uplift on the sort of average year on year we've had for capital spending on transport in recent years, and crucially, it's a 5-year settlement. So it does give that certainty in a way that you don't get in other bits of the forest, although it was a bidding competition. But at least it was a long run one. It wasn't, you know, for an individual scheme. It was a bid for a chunky settlement for a program over a number of years. The levelling up fund. It's not really about levelling up, sort of is, but mostly it's a capital pot for sprucing town centres and things. But actually, a lot of our districts are thinking about the future role of their town centres post-pandemic, and we have 6 successful bids, and they will help to grease some of those plans to start to think about how we get public services back in town centres and retail to housing. You know, most of the levelling up fund bids have got that sort of flavour to them. So that is welcome on the public districts to crack on with that work. And then I won't go through the detail, but there's a whole host of sort of pilots and programs that we're actually quite reliant on that kind of got confirmed, everything from program for supported families, working with vulnerable families, through to Made Smart, so just like a business support program, and various others kind of in between. In terms of the gaps, kind of really touched on, I think there's two big ones. The first one was kind of green agenda and retrofit. Now I think there was actually quite a bit in there in terms of money, and it had been announced before the kind of net zero strategy. The big problem for us is there's not a huge amount in there for retrofit, and also it'll be a bidding competition. So if we want a sort of systemic program of retrofitting large numbers of homes, public buildings, or whatever, we don't know what we can do because we wait for the bidding competition to come out, put it in, see how we go. And that isn't how we build the kind of supply chain, the capacity to do this stuff at scale across the city over a period of time. It's going to have that piece family stop-start problem, I think, until they commit to it over a period of time. And then brownfield and housing. There was some additional money for housing, not as much as a lot of the sector. I think this is needed, and then probably my judgment is probably wasn't enough. If the government genuinely wants to be brownfield first, there is still a lack of enough capital to kind of fund the gap. They're doing that, particularly in the north, where a lot of the sites are post-industrial, and they've got who knows what they're underneath the ground. Often you don't know until the shovel goes in. But so those are kind of the gaps. The really interesting bit is the kind of to be confirmed stuff. There's quite a lot in there that's still to be confirmed. So a couple of specific things, and then everything else gets washed up on white paper. So the first one is additional transport bid. So there were two large transport bids. There's Capital One, which was settled, and then one associated with what the government calls bus service improvement plans. So we were required to write a bus service improvement plan to set out how we're going to improve our bus services over the next few years. Every area of the country is required to do this, and then there's a kind of bidding competition of money associated with that. Some of that is capital and is associated with things like electric buses, but the particular thing there is revenue. So what we don't have at the moment is any certainty about what revenue support we may or may not get, and that's what allows you to run more frequent services, to lower fares, to sort of market make in effect. And that's what we're going to need to do over the next few years, is because deregulation has done what it has done. You can't just rely on natural competition to get people to that much. You need to make it incredibly appealing. You need to build it in the way you saw London build it over 20 years to the point where it can wash its face. It's not going to be able to do that immediately. And the revenue, we will see where we go. If not, we're committed to franchising anyway. We know other committed local funding sources already, but government support for revenue would help and speed it up. And then active travel, similarly, there's going to be another competition at some point for inciting infrastructure, which we will need to bid for. So then the big thing is the levelling up white paper, as kind of people have talked about. So we understand it will probably be at the end of the year, although I could imagine at the point at which it goes right round to ministers, it suddenly is quite controversial, and that end of the deadline slips a wee bit. We will see. We know what the heading is going to be, because it keeps popping up in ministerial speeches. So it's kind of a version of pride in place, living standards, improving public services, and leadership and accountability. And they always say those sort of four things. And on the pride in place, it's a lot of sort of levelling up fund for physical, we call it hanging baskets stuff, counting regen, sorts of crime and behaviour gets brought up online in that market. On living standards, it looks quite a lot like an industrial strategy, but you can be your own judge of that. Public services tends to concentrate quite a lot on education, skills, those sorts of issues. Ministers tend to bring them in that bucket. And then local leadership is devolution. It comes up overtly there. And I think the big question there is about the degree to which it could be about existing MCAs versus county deals. So the government's proposed this idea of county deals for the sort of shire, usually, but not always conservative counties, to get some of the powers that the city regions currently have. So in terms of sort of policy decisions that we're waiting on, quite a lot, there's a thing called the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the sort of successor for EU funding. And EU funding has been really important over about 20 years, where it manages to return to its economic development. On the revenue side, it funds all sorts of employment support and skills initiatives, particularly for kind of quite vulnerable groups. And on the capital side, the national levy, so the EU money is kind of been used all over the place. We had, as part of that Devolution, did a thing called intermediate body status, which we had a degree of freedom about how that was used in the city region toward our own priorities. There's a big question about how much freedom of action that on the SDF. I think we know what the overall sum nationally is going to be. We don't know how it's going to split between places and how it's going to work on the ground and the degree of freedom we get. So there's a decision to be made there. Sort of Lou talked already about skills. This is looking more positive. Previous Secretary of State was quite widely known in his time of combined authority. The new Secretary of State has moved a little bit and has recognised that some subnational influence over the skill system is probably a sensible thing. So that, I think, we might see a bit on that. On research and development innovation, so the government's committed to increasing innovation R&D spending, innovation R&D spending over the spending review period, pushed the deadline without it target back, but also gave a clear runway. So I sort of think on balance with because it's no longer just a moonshot, it's an actual plan with numbers against it each year. What we don't have yet is much plan about beyond the existing institutions, universities, UK, where that's going to go. And the spending review has a sort of line in it about putting up that paper, setting out plans for getting a higher share of that outside of the Golden Triangle, getting it to other areas of the country. We've been talking questions, we have a very big plan for how we might do that, and we'll see if there's going to be any more detail there in the white paper about how they plan to actually get that spend out of the Golden Triangle and kind of achieving the minimum payment, I suppose. The bits of the country, the left, we kind of covered, and then the critical one I kind of wanted to finish on was this question about accountability, devolution, biddable pots, and all the rest of it. It was quite a core part of the levelling up deal that we put forward. Money is helpful, but actually freedom over how you use it, fungibility and certainty over 3-4 years is also really important. Core part of the offer was, we will take on additional accountability in return for greater responsibility. And I think we're in a better place on that than we were 6 months ago. The current Secretary of State is already talking publicly about, you sort of get the hint that we might have reached the high water mark of these small potted bidding pots. I think the phrase the select committee that the Secretary of State attended last week was you can have too much of a good thing when it came to biddable funding pots, which I think we've been inclined to kind of agree with. So I think that's the one I'm really interested to see is what they talk about in terms of, and it talks to the left review, and it's sort of, what is the government's view about the institutional architecture that is going to drive us? Are we going to get a view about some of these decisions being pushed out to places, or are we going to try to retain our more central way we've seen in recent years? And I think the final thing I can finish on is I think levelling up over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of the pride and less stuff, we've seen a lot of the investment in town centres, high street renewal, all the rest of it. What I think we're waiting for in the white paper is the productivity side of it. Levelling up is two things. It is clearly there's a degree to which government rightly wants to see places seeing visible improvements in a couple of years' time. And that is their political right, but it's also reasonable. It's not good to say to people, don't worry, we've got a plan, everything will be better in 20 years' time, and it will just through the economy. We would want to see forward momentum. But you also need that medium-term plan for how are we going to tackle productivity challenges and how are we going to drive it and all that stuff. That is what we're waiting for and levelling up like that.
Thanks very much, Sam. Really good stuff there. And again, just to pick on that point, and I think all three the panelists have mentioned it, this whole sort of competitive bidding process that just permeates right from everything at the present moment in time. And Cynic Kimby, which has grown ever stronger over the last 18 months or so. Now, you sort of look at some of this stuff and say, actually, it's not about areas in most need, it's about areas that have the best bid writers, to some extent. Now, I know obviously you need the evidence to put in there, but you've got to, you're beginning to veer a little bit down that route, and that's not levelling up, that's as far from levelling up as you can possibly think, because you're just relying then on a small group of people to do that. I was interested to hear from you as well about what you know, the four sort of pillars of the levelling up white paper, and yeah, the pride in placement. I think there's been a lot of that. I think the point exactly there is that productivity bit now that is so important in this, really. It's not just where you live, it's how you live, sort of thing, isn't it, really, that is in this. And I think up to now that's been quite light. You know, I think when we had a go, didn't we, with the local industrial strategy, new government, all of a sudden that phrase disappeared from ministerial titles and one thing and another. But actually, the work's already been done. We know what needs to be done. We just need to make sure that it gets delivered under a different brand, don't we? So
I think it's hardening on that from Andy Haldane coming in for 6 months. It's hardening on that from Andy Haldane, former Bank of England chief economist, but freelance on regional policy and all sorts in speeches kind of regularly, chaired the government's independent industrial strategy council until they abolished it. But has not been brought in on a 6 months comment to effectively be the lead official on levelling up. It's very involved in the white paper as we understand it. I think that's positive because it's got that background and that interest. And the fact that they asked him is a positive sign.
There's some interesting moves. Of course, now we've obviously got the department with levelling up its title, which I think took most people by surprise. I'll be quite honest, just before that announcement was made, I had a feeling that levelling up may have been a little bit on the way out, and they were going to rejig it and repurpose it, and before you know it, Michael will go to the Secretary of State. It's there in a ministry title and all the rest of it. So they reaffirmed it. We just need to obviously to know what the actual definition is and what it is. I'm hoping that we're already doing 90% of it by accident, really. In that, I'm feeling we are. I'm feeling we're pretty much well on that there, but just have to make sure we match up with what government's expectations are. Has anybody got any questions? There's a lot of information, some fantastic points been made. Has anybody just got any questions they want to ask?
Yeah, great presentations, as always with these events. I just wonder if we could take that finger on the green button a little bit. It's been on there for at least 18 months. Just take our finger off that green button. And when we're business and policymakers are articulating to the government in these bids, in the attempts to gain government intervention for major strategic priorities and infrastructure, what do we articulate to the government are the strengths of the Greater Manchester economy? You know, are there particular sectors, say, for example, advanced materials, where productivity potential is much higher than other sectors? What sectors in the Greater Manchester economy do we articulate our highest rate of potential? And, you know, my second point on it, another sort of related, is one of the problems we have with levelling up is that we are conceptualising it in terms of the domestic. See, we need to do this, you know, it's about domestic levelling up. Isn't domestic levelling up really important and the way that we articulate it in order to gain direct investment? So two different, but I think it's about articulation of our strengths.
Who's going that? Sorry. Please, if you want to go the first part.
So I'll probably so sectorally, I think we're pretty clear in the sense that even if we don't call it a local industrial strategy, we call it something else at some point, the evidence base that's sat under that is the evidence base. And you could probably sprinkle a pandemic on top of that that's changed. Well, actually not. What it's done is accelerate largely. The things we knew were coming anyway, and we thought were a 5-10 year timeline came in about 10 months. So actually, we were, you know, the strategy is the strategy, and actually the sectoral focus areas are, as you said, material innovation, health innovation, creative and digital, green. Those opportunities are still opportunities. They're probably augmented now, and they're moving faster than we thought. Hence the skills crisis, because we thought we had longer than we had to create the people to work in those businesses. So
the green and the IT migration to the city for the last 12 months or so.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's extraordinary, and I've worked in that industry for 21 years and never seen anything like this. So I think, and actually bizarrely, of course, when we're with government and when we're with business, we're extraordinarily positive about that. And largely, we spent a long time, as I keep saying to people, this is not happened by accident. People aren't arriving here because they happened upon us. We've had a long-term strategy for 10, 15 years to say the future of everything. Don't think of technology as a vertical sector. Think of technology as a horizontal that will power every single industry from the NHS all the way through to BBC over at media. You know, this is going to be a key skill base we need. So I think Greater Manchester's been really smart on where it's put its bets. And we've seen that accelerate, you know, even more. And perhaps I'll let Andy talk to the second point, and we'll talk a bit around it a bit more. But I think, interestingly, I think part of what we need to think about when we talk about levelling up, and certainly as a LEP, we're beginning now to talk about this as we move forward into the next phase of the economic recovery. I think we should just stop thinking about it all as being something that's funded by government. I mean, actually, I think what we need to realise is, I mean, that however the pots get carved or the deals get done, there will only be a finite amount of government money. So actually, the most important thing, which again Greater Manchester is good at, is creating investable propositions that the private sector, and you're quite right, internationally, people will go, I'm looking for a place to put this business, or I'm looking for this talent, or I'm looking for. And actually, that's the smartest thing we can do now, is to not assume we're going to get a check from the government. And if government wants to come and help co-fund it or stand next to it while we do it, that's absolutely brilliant, you know, and we'll welcome that. But I think we need to, as we have done for centuries before, you know, be in partnership between the public sector and the private sector, and enable the massive private sector interests, nationally and internationally, in Greater Manchester, to power some of these things that we want to happen. So actually, and certainly for the LAP, if there aren't should there be a LAP in the future, or it's called something else, I think that would be a part of what we can help do, is to be a platform for some of that private sector partnership. And actually look at things like AMPI, you look at ID Manchester, you look at some of the things happening anyway under that innovation plan. They're largely going to be private sector led and private sector funded, and there might be points where we need policy support from government, or we need skill support from government, you know, but largely we know what he's doing, and we want to go and drive it ourselves, you know, and that allows us to pace, because as you said, this stop start of, are we going to be the inordinate amount of energy that has to go into seeing whether we can win a pot of money from government. You know, we're better to be in a position where we've at least got some confidence in the investment and the line of sight.
Andy, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So in other sectors, yeah, we're really clear about them. We've been clear about them for a while, and a lot of the sort of, I'm guilty of being a policy person, so you think about it in terms of these levers, but you're deploying those levers on those sectors. So you take the sort of skills freedoms that we're looking at. We were looking for those so that we could pilot boot camps to get people into the manufacturing sector. The pre-apprenticeship would allow people without a degree to quickly get into that sector, or lab technicians or whatever. Similarly, Brentford, it's not an abstract thing, it's because we've got one of the largest deployment sites in Europe, sitting between Bury and Rochdale, ready to be an advanced manufacturing cluster with Young People Institute, which is most of the way funded now, it's at the centre of it. I think that what is important, though, is a bit of certainty about the environment. So one of the things that's very hard as a combined authority is we're not the Scottish Government, where the settlement is clear about where the responsibilities are. Government can just randomly choose to re-centralise things, can just randomly choose to, do skilling or we do it. Planning, doing or we do it. So I don't think like there is an important part of them, but it's more about an understanding of where it sees the borders to be, because we can choose to do anything we like, but if you're moving into a contested policy space where the UK government also believes that it's got the kind of competency, it starts to get difficult. Foreign direct investment is a really good example of that. I'd be interested to see what comes out of it, what I think about that. We've already been sort of pre-pandemic, the mayor was going out for the year, and we've got an internationalisation strategy, we're not waiting. Greater Manchester has for a long time already invested in, and I now use the name because it's this time of day, but my answer, nobody waited, we just cracked on, and we've had such a big institution that's done that for a while, and we'll continue to do it. So I think you're right, I don't think anybody's waiting for kind of over the hill, but there's a bit of a 3-year spending review is incredibly well in the white paper, because we were talking about this before we started. Since 2016, really, we've just been in sort of endless cycles of 1-year settlements and priorities moving. It's very, very difficult to orient yourself when so much of our funding and our responsibility are, to a degree, still on high. The goal of the medium term is that we need a clearer, more permanent role within the state. And there's a point at which we need to take a decision about what it is that these devolved institutions are responsible for and not continually chop and change it. And as mature institutions, that means with their own politicians, that means they can then set their own direction and not be constantly second guessing their next white paper. But we are where we are at the moment, and the degree to which we do those decisions kind of bring into progress. But as we said, you sort of actively basing which way we know what the opportunities are. We're going out and direct investment. I mean, and where it's really important, we'll do it anyway. So the example that I would kind of draw on there is buses. You know, our political leaders took the decision to refranchise buses before there was any certainty about whether there was any government funding coming at all, and they put their own local funding behind that because it is the right thing to do for lots and lots of reasons for this city region's economy. If government comes over as Spence says and wants to provide some extra funding, make it easier and crack on, that would be wonderful. But decisions will be taken anyway.
I think most of it's covered. The joy of going third this time. I think one thing I would add is I think one of the interesting bits where Manchester United has played itself, it's played the cards very well over the last 30 years. It being so bold in having its own long-term strategy, regardless of what the government is doing, which allows you constantly to simply hook what it is you want to do into whatever funding stream comes out. Now, lots of other, that's been a huge boom because that is really one of the things that has driven Manchester massively out of the country. One light of influence of its from the regional government's point of view is Manchester's great challenge is lots of the places that finally learned to copy that. It's actually taken them a very long time, but actually that's really interesting, some genuinely really interesting thinking coming out, particularly in the West Midlands, particularly in Liverpool, and when I start to actually set your own agenda, do not be dominated by whatever is happening in Whitehall. Make sure you know what you want to do, because sometimes that means you can do if the opportunity comes along for whatever reason. You know why you're doing it, you know what the next set of projects will fall from that is. It lets you take a very long term analysis. And to conclude, I think one of the ironies in this is from his time as Mayor of London, Boris knows. So I mean, one of the great things I remember, it would be exactly when, but if you remember, he'd done the Boris buses and we'd done the Boris bikes and all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly out came this 2070, £1 trillion London transport plan. And everyone's just like, what the? It's like, where has this come from? I said, but actually, this is the point. This is where we are going, with you or without you. We have set the vision. It's like, one thing that's interesting is, you know, there's two people involved. Let's probably more. But there is the old city regional mayor boss, who, when he was in that position, gave the sense he understood some of this stuff. But
there's mostly Boris, right? There's the Museum of Science and Industry speech.
Yeah.
Boris several days after he was made Prime Minister.
Exactly. We are going to take this steam locomotive and we are going to build, we're going to build a new railway. And it's all vanished. It's like, it's not that he doesn't get, and I think this is actually to go back to putting my thumb on the plum button. Is this actually one of the things that I think increases the frustration? It's not that you're dealing with someone who hasn't ever exhibited signs of getting this. There is actually a lot of his stuff in this time in London where, okay, there was the usual Boris waffle, there always has been, but it's like, he understood this idea of the devolution power and local strategy. But when he was Mayor of London, that meant giving power to him. Now he's Prime Minister. He means giving it away.
Absolutely. I think that's the thing about that popularity. But I think the other thing I'd say is just looking at the sector bit and building on what Lou said there, there's also some fantastic businesses. And it's not that businesses we need to have the great rub of press for, it's sometimes the support mechanisms that sit around it from the point of view of the environment they operate in. And that's the bit that we really do have to, you know, say to government, look, enough's enough, this needs changing, and do it in a way that you're not sort of ranting at them or anything like that, but you're just setting it out. We've got a great success story in Greater Manchester with some of these businesses, but just think what they could do if they get that fairness, if they get the opportunity to get the same as other parts of the country again, if we get that London-style transport system, if we get something that connects with the cities across the north, just think then what you could have. And that's the point that they consistently don't seem to get at a government level. They see it as this competition, and we can't let Manchester as Leeds, the players off against each other. But actually, you think about it coming together, just think then what the economy could achieve. That reminds me of somebody in 2014, I think it was, the Chancellor at the time, coming up with something called the Northern Powerhouse. Who knows what may happen, whether that may come back into vogue, who knows. But the concept of that is fundamentally correct, and it's the same concept we need today, about working together and unleashing business, because leave that to us. We know what works best here, but we need the environment to work and push it forward. I think we've got some very blunt conversations coming up in government. If what happens tomorrow happens tomorrow, I think some very blunt conversations coming up.
Well, I say tomorrow's announcement to tell you whether Northern Powerhouse
Yeah,
is a real thing.
yeah.
One of the cornerstones, isn't it?
Yeah, it is absolutely connectivity, and we'll see what comes of that. So who knows? When we
Bradford
go.
always struggled to include it in the market.
Sorry?
Didn't Bradford always struggle really to include it?
Yeah, because they,
Nobody wanted Bradford in their city region. As far as I was concerned, Bradford always struggled. And Bradford, more than Leeds, is going to be the one who's attached.
no through mainland station. Trains go in and reverse out. That took me by surprise. The first time I ever went. Wonder what on earth was going on. It's just crazy in this world that you've got something like that, that's happening.
Britain's youngest city as well.
Yeah.
Britain's youngest city. 60% of the population is under 25. It's bonkers. Yeah. So in terms of growth potential,
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Absolutely. Yeah. Gentlemen, there. Come back in a minute, sorry.
Thanks, everyone. As a Londoner of 30 years, I wouldn't give Johnson too much credit for this. I'm a new member of the Parliament, so I recognise my accent. So I'm not an expert on Manchester, so I'd be really interested in listening to the conversation. So I just want to pick up on something Luke said, because I specialise in culture, creative and business and economies. And I've worked for 3 decades in Spain. So I'm starting to look around here and some interesting parallels in the discourse policy and also the reality on the ground, perhaps. And I've also been environmentalist, involved in environmental movements, the Green Party as well. And of course, I was listening very intently to what's going on in Glasgow, particularly, I don't know if anyone knows a speech by Professor Tim Jackson, who's from Economies and Sustainability, so and the whole idea of net zero, the question, 73% of net zero targets are question. So arguably we should be looking at zero carbon. So we should be looking at carbon zero, not net zero. What I really want to ask is how we can join the expansion of the visitor economy, which is one of Manchester's strengths, whilst attending to those really serious targets. Speaking of Bradford, Leeds Bradford Airport has an expansion plan, so it's Manchester. So I'm just wondering how we sort of reconcile those
Yeah, without the answer being staycations. So I think, it's an interesting tension, as you will in this time here, the Greater Manchester economy, because obviously there's a kind of shareholder structure here that ties the city region to the airport, as well as just it obviously being a significant asset. But if you look at an internationalisation strategy, for example, having a significant international airport on our doorstep has tended to put us in a very, when in the old days in London Powerhouse, we were, the thoroughfare, if you like, for international traffic. So I think it's the medium to long term answer lies in back to that green innovation point, and actually some of the things that the airport is starting to explore around, behaving, whether it's net zero, zero carbon, and in a responsible way. Given that we as a city region have and you will hear Andy as mayor talk about this all the time, we've hung our hat well and truly on being a global leader as a green city region and a global leader digitally. So there's 2 very clear things that we're talking about when we from a business perspective, it's kind of easier because you can see already in our weird hybrid universe, actually we're servicing a lot of business doing things like the service industry without leaving our room. So suddenly there's a different dynamic with international travel. But there's a massive challenge for the airport, an innovation challenge I would frame it as, which is how do you remain a significant asset, but not undermine our credentials about, how we're perceived internationally and our genuine commitment to 2038 in Manchester Case and other dates but there is a real and genuine ambition to be a global exemplar on inclusive and green growth, to the point we wrote it down in our economic strategy. You will see it in our Greater Manchester strategy with that. So my personal view is you write things down and then you can help people speak to the planning. But I think it's like many things, it's an innovation challenge, because actually innovation should be the answer to many of those things. And there should, if we get that right, be a cluster of new business and new skills that comes out of cracking that innovation challenge that's massively exportable for us as a city region. So I think having the airport as one of those key assets in, and we talked about Innovation GM, as our umbrella play to government on how do you join the 10 boroughs together in an innovation ecosystem. So the airport is a really significant, not just because we can fly people in, but because actually it has an opportunity to show a different model. But at the same time, as we speak today, we're talking to an organisation that's suffered economically, obviously it's been on its knees, for the last 2 years. So I think we've got to work as a kind of city region partner to the airport on that innovation process and try and help them understand that we do have an opportunity to show a different way of doing it. But yeah, it's a tough one.
I'm here to try that question.
Yeah, right past this one. It's hard, right? I think what I would say is, businesses are not just international, of course, it's a critical part of it. So on the international, on the airport side, it's an innovation challenge. On the domestic side, it's much easier. We've just been talking about it. We know what the solutions are. They just actually need to be built and delivered. It's a proper functioning public transport system that is integrated both within and beyond our borders. And actually a lot of domestic tourism is supported through that. And, tomorrow.
Do you have a visitor arrival target? Domestic, international?
So aside from the international strategy that we talked about, there's through Marketing Manchester. So in the Greater Manchester University, as you'll discover, there's MIDES, which is our own investment agency, and working in partnership in the growth companies, our kind of collective group of those companies. So the growth sits in there, and in there is Marketing Manchester. So Marketing Manchester sets our visitor economy strategy, our ambitions, our targets, and also handles some of our sectoral marketing as well. So it's not just dedicated to visitor economy. It also will do our conference bidding. It will handle our digital sector campaigns. So it's a broader remit, but it's heartland and has always been that visitor economy strategy. It's obviously had in itself a very difficult time, pivoting to basically an entirely, domestic market for a big chunk of time. And I have to say, done an amazing job of making sure that we stay an attractive place for people to come and visit and spend time in.
Yeah, one or two things. I think what you talk to is the single hardest question at the heart of the sort of COP never got around to discussing. It's fundamentally how do you decarbonise and maintain economic growth of lifestyle? That's essentially that is the $1 million question, and it's unbelievably difficult. All I would say is remember that an airport plays a multitude of roles. So it's not just inbound and outbound tourism, but inbound and outbound business travel. From an old stat I saw years, this statistic would be 10 years out of date, there was something that broadly around 70% of all inbound FDI is located within an hour of the port of entry. So money does not spread much beyond where you land. And so that is an important part. The other one is it's an outbound route of goods. That's often there's a belly hold freight. Is really important for you. If you want GM to be a region that is exporting more and more high value, timely exports, they are not going to sit on a ship for 8 weeks. very low level, they're going to go straight in the belly hole. Right? So there's a multiple sort of few roles there. And my general answer, most of the deep valuation stuff is when you're challenged, how are you going to get everything to zero? It's like, I don't know. But actually, taking half of it out, we know exactly how to do it. Yeah, it's like not cutting air passenger duty on internal UK flights, whilst not supporting the rail network, which would help you to travel by rail instead, is wrong. We know that's wrong. We will change that is wrong. All the policy advisors telling government will have been telling them it's wrong. And so the last 40% of CO2, the last 40-50% of CO2 is going to be unbelievably hard. But the first 50 is fine. We know how to do it. Let's just get on with it.
I think the other thing I'll add to that is across the wider business community, again, there's a lot more recognition and acceptance that it needs doing now, and doing it for the right reason. We did a survey in Q3 that ran with our cost economic survey. It was supported by a business called Q Energy. We asked 4 questions on this. The first one was around business awareness of what UK's net zero ambitions are. 55% of respondents, we had about 380 businesses reply to it, and about 55% said they were unaware of what the UK's ambitions were for net zero, which isn't a great start, to be quite honest. Pre-COP26, let's just put that. Whether that number's changed now or not, who knows. But when you dug into the other questions and looking at, some of the barriers, one of the barriers that came out was, it's a question of measurement. We don't know how we measure our current carbon output, so we don't know what's going out. How on earth can you measure it to work out what you need to reduce? So that's a real big thing that he's looking at. And the bit around it was very much, around, well, are you already doing things? And a lot of respondents are already taking steps, even if it's just something simple like changing the lights, or automatic switch-offs on machines, etc., etc. There's a lot of stuff already taking place. The question was what you're planning on doing, and there's some fantastic things, around changing to electric vehicles, battery storage, all sorts of things going there. So businesses are in this space, probably more so than they ever have been, but they might not be aware of the bigger picture stuff, and it's just joining that gap really in that. What I'm saying is, obviously, the more that you get at that level, you do get to that point where all of a sudden you are down to that last 40% real troublesome bit that you do then have to have those more in-depth conversations with people about, and, it's a tricky one. The whole bit of where the airport sits in it. I do believe a few years ago they did say to take the flights out. They are a net zero organisation. If you take the flights out,
Yes, his turnover doesn't look too
bad.
Yeah.
Let's take the flights
Sorry,
out.
Manchester Airport.
You take the flight out, it's just a traffic.
I'm just going to say, it's a hell of a piece of land.
But, I think if you look at, fuel is a really interesting, obviously today, I think was the first flight, wasn't it, was it an RAF plane when it flew on hydrogen powered, and nothing terrible happened, so that's a good thing. But I think there are some genuine kind of green tech innovation pieces they can do. I think we've just launched through the lab, first of all, you have to be ferociously ambitious, therefore, and assume you might only get to 50%. So you have to set the bar ridiculously high and keep it there. And I think, like I say, it helps that we've got Andy in there tenaciously at every opportunity, reminding people of what the ultimate existential crisis is, which is the climate crisis, even though we're very consumed with the pandemic and the kind of Brexit and economic crisis that we're in at the moment. So I think, we've set out a campaign called Be Net Zero, which is to make every business in Greater Manchester within 10 years net zero. So that is down to that practical advisor. And so that's a ridiculously ambitious journey to go every year. We're going to have to work with chunk of business to support them on that journey. And we're about to now, having made all the lofty headlines as a city region, go on the first step of that, which is the clean air zone. And we know that's going to be bumpy. We know there's going to, but we're going to have to tenaciously get that over the line, or we're not going to be believable. Like in the lofty ambition, if we can't get the first step of that over the line. So I think none of what we're describing is going to be easy. But if we don't get those first markers on that roadmap over the next 2-3 years, we might as well forget any of the bigger ambitions, because nobody's going to have that back to the confidence point. Nobody's going to have any confidence that when we say we're going to do something, we're actually going to do it. So
I do think Greater Manchester being Greater Manchester, we can crack that. More people will follow, because they'll turn around and say, well, if they can do it, we can do it. and that's going back to the point you made, Chris, where people suddenly follow, the Manchester model, as it used to be called, for doing things. That's not being arrogant about it, it's just how these things sort of tend to work. So it's not without challenges and dangers along the way. But I think the more people speak to, the more confident we feel that it will happen. Not overnight, but we are on that route. So good question. I'm just conscious of time. This lady was here. Maybe take your question. So.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. My question is, how can we ensure that universal credit claimants, whether they are in or out of work, are able to access the good quality opportunities that we've got in the city region? Is that sufficiently part of this levelling up agenda, and have we got the levers that we need locally to do that?
Okay, take this gentleman, and then we'll do two for the price of one.
Okay,
closing down.
It's a business related question. So with the way the world is changing about how we work now, more and more people working from home, and this whole levelling up agenda, for it to match to happen, we think about where they invest their money, because a lot of people are now going to be spending time in their towns and in their villages rather than coming into the city centre. So it is spending in Greater Manchester going to change, and Manchester city centre will become a more experience place rather than somewhere where you come to work and what's the investment around that versus some of the smaller towns where people generally live that haven't really seen investment and are now going to be spending more time there.
Great question. Super question. What's the Golden Universal Credit?
I think I saw two people staring furiously.
Is that your answer?
Mixed, I think, is the answer. So, I think that we've got a set of particularly sort of employment support programs where we've got a fair degree of freedom actually to kind of target them. Services, which means you can start to make the links between those services and sort of growth sectors that we know that we're talking about. Skills, sort of TBD, but I'm feeling confident, I have to say. I think it's looking a lot better than it was a couple of months ago. And then the kind of critical piece of this really is actually built on relationships with trusted plus. So it's not all legal powers, it is folks in local authorities and in our kind of work and skills team knowing local job centre plus needs and being able to sort of make sure that there are pathways that people are being referred to Greater Manchester programmes, what programmes might benefit, the connections are kind of there, and those relationships are really strong. They've built over a number of years, and actually it would be nice if they were in some formal role in the process. You're always a bit twitchy that we want centralising DWP Secretary of State away from all of that being pulled from under us, but current ministers and the current Secretary of State are very supportive of that sort of thing. So I think broadly speaking, yes, we've kind of got the relationships and the connections that we need. The question is about the actual routes and processes into some of those sectors, but we've got those in place. We should have the mechanisms by which to make sure that people on universal credit are a bit further away from the labour market and are able to benefit. I think the only thing up there is the UK SPF thing. So EU funding was pretty crucial to reaching some of those groups a bit further away from the labour market. Lots of those sorts of projects were funded out of the European Social Fund. So fingers crossed, we've got enough freedom of movement on the SPF to continue to support those sort of initiatives.
I think it's a time when, back to our conversation with the workers, Holden constantly got 20 permanent vacancies. It's joining up, isn't it? We've got the tools and things in place probably better than we ever have done through the strength of the work through the combined authority and there and other sort of local government organisations. We just need that final bit, I think, to be quite honest, to make that link.
I think the fact that unemployment hasn't peaked as high as we were worried about, I think there was a worry 6 months ago that you have a wave of new entrants into the JCB employment support system, and everyone goes, well, let's deal with this massive wave here. People have been out there for quite a long time, we've got various barriers, but they're just going to have to wait. And the fact we haven't peaked quite the same way, I hope we're going to see quite as much diversion and attention as we were worried about.
I think also on some of those real future jobs and real future skills around some of those sectors we were talking about for the industrial strategy, we've spent actually quite 18 months, 2 years piloting
some different alternative, more entrepreneurial, so a lot of the boot camp work, which is, you don't have to have a degree, you can come straight out at 16, you can do 4, 5, 6 months in a boot camp, and you can be coding, earning pretty good pathway income, up into, and actually, so some of the entrepreneurialism actually, how we fund that is now for me the next bit. So actually, if you don't happen to have the money to fund the course and buy the laptop, how can we bridge that gap, kind of student loan style, so that, because reality is by the time you're working as an engineer in one of the many, tech companies that's coming to Manchester, within 2 years you'll be earning 50 grand. So reality is borrowing 5k to get over that hurdle is ridiculous. We should have that self-funding mechanism. So actually, I think we're about to see some of the benefit of those things we've been trying piloting to go, there must be a better way than just trying to get everybody into a computer science degree at the university. And for those people who want to do that, brilliant, because there's loads of jobs for them as well. But actually, I think some of that, and it's so simple now, we know what the barriers are. If you don't have a line of sight to know those jobs exist, the first thing we have to do is to show that there is a job, and that starts with the parents as much as the young people themselves, or people in jobs transfer to even understand what opportunity is. Just because you're 30 doesn't mean that opportunity is passed you by. Then you've got to present them with a pathway. Then you've got to give them a mechanism to stop what they're doing to earn income, and and some of the stuff UA92 is doing around trying to bundle that together and go, actually, let's restructure a course so that if you're a single parent who has to work evenings in a bar to fund and has got to pick your kid up from school, we can work the course around that. So I think it's just being a bit more human, isn't it, about how we design those pathways, because the jobs are there, the employers are desperate to take people who've got raw talent and pull them in. So we should be taking that opportunity, not just to import net new talent from elsewhere in the country, but to grow some of our own.
Question, general question about investment and resurgence of towns.
Yeah.
Around Greater Manchester.
Yeah, so we've certainly seen it. We've had a bit of look at this in the last seminar. I've got some ongoing research in this now. So we're definitely seeing it. The pattern is clear. Broad city centres are still down about a third on the whole, where non-core city centres are only down about a fifth. So there's a big. The other thing, actually, so I'm going to reframe the question that you should also think not just about cities versus their suburbs, but different scales of cities and different scales of suburbs. The same pattern is evident throughout the board. So essentially, the city of London is the hardest hit, more than everywhere else. Manchester is harder hit than its outer boroughs, but its outer boroughs are less hard hit than it's. You get kind of quite a spidery network chart of how this affects. I think what you do now, I think, is hugely difficult, because if you sort of wind ourselves back to when we were all sent home in March 2020. The one thing we all did was went to see a gym.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a trifling. Boris stood on the news and said this will be over in 12 weeks. How could he have been wrong? It wasn't. And then we spent most of 2020 kind of going, well, we'll be back in summer. Then life is back to normal in September. We'll get Christmas wave out of the way. We'll be back in spring this year. And it means that we sort of came back in spring, and then there's the summer stuff, and then people will be back in September. So my view then became, everyone's just kind of hanging on for the September return. Everyone goes back to school, the universities come back in. It's not really a dream. And then you think, well, maybe half term. So I think the big question is, I'm not sure, the difficulty on the investment decisions is no one's quite certain when, basically the fundamental question is, are we there? This was the question I posed last month. Increasingly, my view is, I think there's more to go in terms of return to cities, but increasingly my position is we're closer to the end point now than most people would like us to be. The 20 that's not coming in, the extra 20 for me. And that then says, well, okay, so what are you going to do? You've seen some private sector businesses move, and Trax has been very vocal about its strategy to not particularly leave city centres, but to grow its more regional base. Certainly part of the levelling up of the towns, as you said, the physical capital stuff, is very much on the base where people are now spending more money in their local areas. And how do you entice people who normally would be horribly classist here, but the whole point is the whole working from home thing is classist. It's absolutely middle class, well-earning professionals. That's the only slant of the workforce it really affects. How do you get middle class, wealthy, highly disposable earners on the whole to decide that they're going to start spending that money in some of their local towns? If you live in a nice area, if you're in Didsbury, you probably spend quite a lot of your time in Didsbury already. If you're in Altrincham, you probably spend all of your time. The challenge for the Rochdales, the Ashtons, this world, they don't have a large population share, as a large population share of wealthy people in most of us are income. And secondly, they wouldn't normally historically have chosen to spend money there. And so I think that investment question is about kind of who have you got, where are you, in many ways it's the same questions that the GM outline towns in this book. Have been talking about for 20 years. I mean, there's always the what was the Altrincham strategy, what was the Bury strategy, and that's well, who lives there, who lives close by, what have you got that other places haven't got, and how might you get from there. So I don't think the key policy questions haven't shifted. It's the market in which those things operate. And actually the same questions are still pertinent. You're just now asking them of a slightly different audience than you used to expect. Because there was no point asking the middle class professionals in Bury what they might do in Bury during the week, because they said, I wouldn't. I'm in Manchester in my office. Yes. Now you've got your captive audience removed. But the core questions are the same.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the reality is not shaking out yet. Nobody quite knows where it lands. But it's interesting that only 2 years ago we were sat in these Economies talking about death on live stream. You know, it's like, oh, there are all these local towns. You know, so the weird thing is now, as you say, we play the investment right. That required, you know, an ulti market in every one of those. But suddenly everybody will be going, probably out to lunch and they'll work. And the reality is it will be hybrid. But to what shade depends on what sector you're in. I mean, we're over at Slogan Square at the moment. We've just signed in our neighbour, the last 3 offices that have all just signed to 3 massive tech companies who are going, we're going to need to be in the city, we're going to need to be near young talent, we're going to need to be somewhere central near Piccadilly, you know. So even if we're not in it for a year, we just want to get that one so that we know that we've got a 10-year lease on that. So it's really bizarre behaviours, and yet you walk around and if I see 20 people in the day, I'm like, oh hi, oh you're in too, you know. So I think it just nobody knows, and like I said, that nobody's shaken down to a new rhythm, you know, and we're going to go through this right now.
But I think if I can just bring in what we were talking about last time, and the transport system.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, you presented data last time. This was fascinating data. That, you know, if that's the case, and 20% of people Manchester's empty.
Yeah.
And when they do come into work, like say my son, he works 3 days. He has to go into the office 3 days in the fortnight. What does that tell us about the transport strategy that we need? Because there's not going to be that demand every single day, Monday to Friday. You know, Monday to Friday bus pass is going to disappear for 5% of the workforce. And then how you feed that into your transport policy and how you develop a sustainable bus transportation in Greater Manchester when we know that people are not going to be coming into work Monday to Friday.
And if that's the thing, it's a huge challenge. That was probably where we ended up in 10 years anyway. Like we were going to get more, but it's just took kind of a lot longer to kind of work that out, you know. And now it's like, go, we've done it overnight. There you go. Digital transformation. Oh, okay.
But I think it's also worth remembering that commuting journeys to the regional centre are still a minority of public transport journeys. So actually, if you look at a lot of the plans for the next 5 years, they're not about radial routes to the city centre. They're about how do we enable people who are doing a childcare drop-off in bus, how do we enable connections between Rochdale and Bury. They're more focused on bus and less focused on radial measuring in the city centre. Because actually, the goal here, the goal is primarily kind of carbon reduction and reducing car dependency. Yes, there is still a problem of too many people driving to the city centre to commute for work, but really the problem is actually short car journeys outside of the regional centre for day-to-day activities. So the goal really is, so there is a big question about funding, for sure, there's a really big question, which is a broader national question, the international question about how you fund and the degree to which public money into public transit systems when they're not going to wash their face in the same way that they used to on the back of commuters crammed in rush hour. But I think the plan is broad, it isn't just about commuters. And the only thing I was going to say on the town centre thing is I think some of it is new. some of it is accelerating things that a lot of districts are thinking about already. So the need to put more housing in town centres to drive up population numbers to support the high streets. The need to move away from a lot of districts having old 60s shopping centres to having, more food and beverage, hospitality, housing, and the rest of it. A lot of them were thinking about that stuff anyway. And a lot of them, they got fund bits that I talked about, were sort of a bit snippy about development funds sometimes, but actually it's some money to Greece to start to get those plans going. A couple of the 4 shopping centres that they planned demolishing, replacing housing and the rest of it. So some of that stuff I think was already in train and it's just been accelerated. Some of it is harder. And the thing I worry about is, they call it the Zoom shop, right? What about the bits of Greater Manchester where nobody is working from home? Everybody is trying to work, because working from home is half the economy. The other half, they still have to go to work. So actually, I think you can see below the town district level some real disparities emerging that we're going to need to, and at the moment we almost don't even have the data to see them. Actually, we're going to have to be really tight on that over the next couple of years.
Really. A couple of points on that before we finish. The levelling up is not just about Greater Manchester and each place in the UK, it's also within Greater Manchester as well. There's an urgent need to level up in places there. And just going back, I think, Christian, you mentioned it as well, using Bury as the example. I remember I was speaking to a couple of months ago, they'd deliberately taken a trip out to Bury to see what they'd done there with the development in the town centre. Never been to Bury, you go and there's apartment blocks right in the middle of this town centre, retail units on the ground floor, and you sort of look at it thinking, this is different, this is not what you'd expect from a typical town centre somewhere in Greater Manchester. And they deliberately set on that course several years ago. You can see now actually, maybe they knew something we didn't, I don't know, but that looks like the model for success going in the future. I live in Wigan, and recently they just passed plans last week, I think, or this week, I can't remember, lost track of time, to basically flatten the galleries, which, when was that? 20 years ago, 30, something like that? Just flatten it, put residential blocks, new retail, new market hall, one thing or another, right slap bang in the centre of the town, which obviously has created a wealth of support from the local population, as you can probably imagine, or not. You can probably guess the people that maybe are opposing it, but there you go. But it's totally different. If you'd have said, 5 years ago that would happen in the centre of Wigan, I'd say, never. Yeah. Completely different ways of looking at it. Totally, that point is, I class what we've been through in the last 18 months as another sort of industrial revolution. It's completely changed things, brought that advance on. Both from the point of view of work and how we live our lives as well. It's wearing. Anyway, that's fantastic. We've ridiculously overshot our cut-off time of 6:30. So I do apologise for that, but I'd just like to thank Christian, Lou and Andy for their presentations, their views and answering their questions. So thank you guys so much. Thank you for coming and hopefully getting quite a lot out of that. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Again, I do like these events because we get to all sorts of weird and wonderful conversations about things around those topics. But it's been great. There is some food and some further drinks outside, so please hang around and have a further discussion if you want. The next in series is on the 15th of December, I think. Yes, it is.
You don't think there's a slide for that?
It's 2 days before my birthday. I don't want to drop any hints with anybody. I think it is the 15th of December.
That's strategic timing.
And it will be on the clean air zone, which is something that obviously is very topical. But it is on the clean air zone. Whether or not it is going to work in Greater Manchester. Discuss answers on a postcard. So hopefully see you there then. Thank you very much for your attendance, and do hang around for a little bit longer if you can do. If not, have a safe journey back to wherever you may live. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.